now that we had all the three bilateral relations, I'm gonna go to the conclusion part, and I'll make some proposal of the something I just named new partnership of equals. Of course, equals are ES plural because I'm referring to three nations of the United States and China, of course. And then, well, first of all, I want to go back to the notion of very simplistic notion of triangle relations. Do you remember this? Well, according to the current momentum, which we can easily notice, like strengthen Japan-China relations or weaken U.S.-Japan or U.S.-China relations, I can assert that the shape of triangle right now is like this. Well, maybe this is, or definitely, this is not something we can call a G2 of China and Japan. Of course, there's no substantial connection between those two nations. But one thing I'm very sure of is that the United States is isolating itself from those two nations, I guess, right now, at least right now. So, and I must say that this kind of shape of triangle is something nobody actually expected before. And so this is very interesting, I guess. And now I want to draw some lessons from the shape of a triangle, unexpected before. And what kind of implication can we have from current momentum, current events? Well, I think there are two very important points. First of all, the very lucrative notion of G2 between the United States and China, which was first put forward by Fred Bergstein. Not first, maybe, but mainly Fred Bergstein put it forward. Well, the G2 of those two nations actually didn't work. G2 doesn't work. This is very obvious when you take a look at what happened recently, like U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, or Google's possible withdrawal from Chinese market, or what happened in Copenhagen, and so forth. And actually, G2 didn't work. And one more very important implication is that the very traditional and important relations or alliance between Japan and the United States has to be modified to adjust to the 21st century type threats and opportunities, of course, like North Korean nuclear issue, or Chinese expanding military budget issue, or Taiwan issue, or those kind of regional or maybe global issues. And I'm going to focus on those 2 points afterwards. Okay, let's go to the first point, U.S.-China relations, or not G2, but U.S.-China relations. Well, in this U.S.-China relations, I can clearly see very acute dilemma of foreign domestic politics. For example, well, this is kind of complicated, but when a nation wants to develop kind of bilateral relations with some country, maybe domestic politics of that country will hinder that, or something like that. This kind of dilemma always takes place when it comes to U.S.-China relations, and so this is very problematic, I think. And one more important and problematic issue is that Western regime or rule, for example, IAEA rule, or WTO criteria for registration, or environmental talk in which just took place in Copenhagen, or something like that. Those kind of Western rules, or the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Those kinds of Western regime or Western rules are usually, or not always, but most of the time, very uncomfortable for China, rising China. One very clear example is, I guess, Copenhagen talk. And and at the same time, Chinese new regime or new rule, which now China is rapidly establishing inside its sphere of power projection, is not only uncomfortable, but threatening for the United States or other Western nations, maybe including Japan. So, well, here I want to make a proposal that, so basically because of those two, malignant characteristic of U.S.-China relations, the dilemma of foreign and domestic policies, or the incompatibility of Western rules and Chinese rules. Because of those problems, I think it's high time for those two nations to cooperate with each other to establish totally new rules, which is independent from the Western conventional regime or rule and the Chinese new regime or rule. So basically, the basic idea is that the previous G2 concept is the G2 between the United States and China was attempt of the United States to engage China in conventional rule, right? So and China felt some kind of uncomfortable for that kind of attempt from the United States, because China was trying to establish its own rule. So I think it's time for both nations to cooperate with each other to establish totally new rule, independent from those kind of conventional Chinese new regime. And this is my first point. And then let's go to the second point, U.S.-Japan relations. Well, of course, just as I said before, U.S. and Japan alliance, traditional alliance, has to be modified, in accordance with the new reality of the 21st century. And there are lots of signs which can indicate that kind of trend. For example, last year we introduced the new party, DPJ, Democratic Party of Japan, for the first time in more than 55 years. And actually we celebrated 50th anniversary of this traditional alliance just several weeks ago, I guess. And so I think it's time to modify these relations to better fit the reality of present world situation. And one very one very important key issue here is that I'm not so sure, but I think the United States is now regarding Japan. Of course, this is kind of I will go too far, but of course, Japan is not merely unsinkable aircraft carrier or something, right? So I think Japan should become influential stakeholder, which is on this slide. Well, I think that Japan can be an influential stakeholder. Well, I'm saying Japan's influential because, well, Japan's influential, isn't it? Japan has really good soft power all over Asian region, and Japan's the #1 holder of U.S. bond, which indicates that Japan can leverage its economic and financial power to shape the problematic global capitalism economy. And of course, Japan can, by doing those kind of stuff, Japan can be influential, I guess. And I think Japan's, of course, Japan's a major stakeholder in Asia Pacific region, because partly because Japan is in the middle of, geographically in the middle of two major, not superpowers, but great powers, the United States and China. And so I guess Japan can play a role, this kind of critical role here in this region. But it necessitates United States change of stance toward Japan, I guess. So I think the United States should regard Japan not merely as a subordinate or something, but as a regional stabilizer or regional balancer state. Well, if the United States were to treat Japan as this kind of independent balancer, I'm saying that Japan will have to be independent, both, especially politically. Right now, I think because of the military aspect, Japan's now subordinating the United States inevitably. But I think Japan should play a more role in the region of military operations, even outside Japan. So this is all about the burden sharing of Japan and the United States in relations with more and more destabilized East Asia. And so if the United States would treat Japan as an independent balancer, giving Japan more autonomy in its political field and military field, Japan can play. It would be in the national interest of Japan to act as an independent balancer, which will take balance between the United States and China, and which will mitigate the future contingency, I guess. And it's also in the national interest of the United States to treat Japan as not a subordinate, but independent stakeholder, influential, independent regional balancer state, and which will reduce the risk of future conflict between the United States and China and so forth. And with all those kinds of my suggestion met in the future, I think maybe the trilateral relations of the United States, Japan, and China will become de facto G3 of those nations. Well, this is all for presentation. Thank you very much for your listening.